So can you talk a little bit about the challenges, the learnings? How do you think this is going to develop?
I was given a document about how to talk about this. I wish I had it here. So I think I'll tell the story the way I like to tell is that when we talk about AR and VR, and I was talking to you about this, they sold us a vision. 10 years ago, they told us, there will be this world of spatial interface and content, rich content all around. And when the team, and this happened mostly before I joined the team, but this is what they told me, is they set out to build that vision of really rich AR and a lot of content precisely located in the world. So the feature that we built is walking navigation. So if you're going from here to there, it's something that helps you go there. So the initial iteration of this feature was to very precisely put markers like on the sidewalk to tell you you go this way, right? And what happened is that, there is a very first realization, which is even though Google Maps has a lot of data and it's able to show you that path on the map on your phone, that data is really not accurate at the level of saying, here is the sidewalk, or across the street here where the zebra is. No. So they had to start to scale back on that vision of this really rich augmentation of the world into an augmentation that is good enough for the data that we have. So what happened then, if you've seen the what got released out there, there is this huge arrows like this size that tell you basically go kind of like that way, and it's very coarse, but it's the type of augmentation that we are comfortable doing because we know it is correct, right? And then there is kind of like a label over there when you look over there that says, so yes, come this way, right? But we don't tell people, where the sidewalk is. We don't tell people, you need to cross the street here. We still rely on people being able to make those calls themselves, and for them to sort of like complement the system. So in a way, it's more of an advisory role than a guiding role. And I think that's one of the principles that we will continue to see in the way that we approach, right? That also means that, that it's created homework for us. So we know that for a lot of things that we want to do, we need better data. So a bunch of people out there at Google trying to make the data better and better, right? So yeah. So what was your question? I kind of got lost. Like, what did you learn?
So
right?
Yeah, what did you learn? And for example, trying out the Google Maps, needing to walk around,
So that's one of the things. The data is not perfect. We need to downgrade the experience. And that experience that they sold us, we are, even though we would like to get there, we're not going to be there in many years. But there are augmentations that we can do and that they are better. So in number two, having more of a guiding approach instead of a precise augmentation, being kind of like a guide, an advisory role. And that's very ethereal to say, but the big arrow instead of the precise points of the sidewalk is a good. Also, we learned that AR uses a lot of energy. So we had to size the interaction to small moments so that we know that we are not draining the user's battery. So what happens then is that when you're doing AR walking navigation, it tells you go that way, and then you put your phone down, and then when you arrive to where your turn is, then you can pull it out again and says, okay, now you have to take that diagonal. So it is these kind of like bite-sized moments of augmentation that add a lot of value without, killing the device. But I think the most significant learning for the team, you might ask why this walking navigation thing, like was that the most important thing that Google Maps could do? And I asked myself the same question, like, oh, this is so boring. But when you look at it from a value point of view, this was one of the features that people kept complaining about. As it happens, I learned when I joined Google Maps that about 10% of the people in the universe can't read maps. They just can't read the map. They can't find results, and there are many reasons for that. And so when you look at the list of complaints that we often receive every month, one of the complaints is, I can't figure out where I am in this map, even though there is a blue dot that says you're there. So, and this is one of the features that, at least while you are doing this walking navigation, especially at the beginning of the walking navigation, it tells you exactly, you have to go that way. So it takes that 45 seconds of figuring out where you are in this map and zooming in and zooming out and reading and trying to find those things in the world to 3-second interaction. And that is very, very valuable. Yeah.
Yeah, so the question, and I think it's regarding what you just said, but do you ever ask yourself why augmented reality? Like, why augmented reality? Why not virtual reality? Why not use an iPad, like a tablet? Why not use your mobile? Like, why not use any other device? Like, why do it in augmented reality?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we definitely did ask that question a lot, and we are actually now dabbling in virtual reality for that reason. I think you kind of have to look at it for the specific use cases that you're doing. So I think with the this model exploration sort of use case that we're doing, that really started to make sense in virtual reality for a few different reasons. But I think some things can work in AR as well if it can't be done any other way. So we did a project earlier this year where we were visualizing Wi-Fi signal strength. So the goal was to really visualize 5G because that's going to be rolled out. And 5G is one of those things where it's sort of the properties of it, it's very line of sight. So it doesn't go through walls well or any physical objects. And so if you're installing it or working with it, you really kind of need to see where the signal is. And so the developers actually built a drone and they programmed it to fly around and collect signal strength. And then we used an iPad to visualize the signal. And that's really something you can't do in any other medium, right? You couldn't do that in virtual reality, and I can't envision how you could do it on a desktop. So that worked really, really well for AR, right? So I think you just have to think about the specific use case and figure out what makes sense for that.
Yes, every day, right? So especially because now we are moving into what's next? What are we gonna do next in AR? And so we have a shopping list of possible things we can do, and it's is this an AR thing? No. Yeah. So I forgot my point. I was gonna say something interesting.
Why AR? Why not voice? Why not audio?
Oh no, yes, what I was going to say is, the problem is this. So AR is something that it is really magical if you have glasses. If you are able to do it in glasses, you might ask yourself, why would you not do it in AR, right? The problem that we have right now is that we don't have glasses, so we have the vision, but we don't have the device. So we have to find it's like a poor version of that vision, what we can do today. So we have to find the cases that have enough value for people to put up with that poor version of it. I do think that a lot of the things that we are trying to do in information are native AI things, AR things. So yeah.
So let's talk about the design process and how you design for augmented reality. How does that process look like? How does it start? How does it continue? Like, how do you do the prototyping? Can you go a little bit into that?
Yeah, I feel like it's a process that's kind of quite different from sort of web or mobile design in the sense that is a bit more of a linear process. I mean, obviously it's iterative. We all know, you design and then you keep refining and that kind of thing. But when I say linear, in the sense that you do the sort of the UX and then the visual design and then the developers get a hold of it and then you sort of support the developers. But with something like AR or VR, I feel like design and development is so sort of intertwined. So we really have to work closely with the developers at every stage, because so often, like, you'll have an idea for something to do and then the developers are like, that's just not going to work for X, Y, and Z reason. But then maybe they think of something that you as a designer didn't think of, right? Because I think there's a lot of technological constraints right now for us, and so a lot of times, we're sort of ahead in terms of the vision, but then the technology hasn't caught up yet, and so that's really a big challenge. But I mean, as far as like actually designing, that's also its own challenge as well, because we don't really have the design tools in the same way that we do for web design. Like, you have your Sketch and Illustrator and things like that, but when it comes to doing something that's going to be in 3D, like that's a lot harder. And so you have to get something down somehow, because it's really hard to convey what you're talking about in AR or VR just through words. So I'm definitely storyboarding, almost like a movie sort of like layout or script, and with sort of illustrations is like a good starting point. But then you kind of have to get creative and sort of like cut things out of cardboard, use physical objects, place them around you and sort of interact with them that way. I mean, I'll take photos of things, of physical objects or spaces, and then sort of start mocking things up over the top of it. Anything you can kind of do, because obviously there are other tools, like professional tools. I mean, I have teammates that will try to go into Maya or Blender and sort of 3D model something, or Cinema 4D. But I mean, a lot of these are, they have a steep learning curve and they take time. And sometimes, you just don't have that time, right, to do all of that. So you often have to just get very creative in terms of how you do things. But then it's also another challenge, because often things sort of fall apart because you do a lot of things, and there's a lot of trial and error involved in AR and VR. You often just don't know if something's going to work until you do it. And then you do it, and then it doesn't work. And then you try something else, and then it doesn't work. And so there's a lot of like testing that has to go into it, and just getting people to try it out, because so many times you think you've come up with like a really simple interaction, and like people can't find it, they can't figure it out, and you just have to keep trying to find different ways of going about it.
And then for you, using multiple types of devices and designing across those devices, like, how challenging is that? I think you talked a little bit about these challenges before, when you were talking about like the different input methods, right? So when you're designing for augmented reality and you might be using voice or gesture, then that's I guess it's a different type of interaction that causes the user to use than designing for VR that usually has controllers, or using for mobile that has touch and you see it through a screen. Can you talk a little bit about how you mitigate those, and how do you design just one application that fits all?
Yeah, I don't think you can. Not at this point. Like, there isn't enough convergence to be able to design one thing that's going to work for all of those. Like I said, that the mobile app has to have a lot of 2D UI elements. When it's a headset, everything has to be in that 3D world. It's just not possible to design one thing. So you kind of end up having to design separate things and sort of try to streamline the experience as much as possible. I think one of the big challenges with the different platforms, though, is that the user behavior changes for the different they're using a different device. And that really was something that we found a lot sort of between, say, headset and mobile. So for instance, because we're doing data visualization, we wanted people to walk around the visualizations, right? Because the whole goal is to sort of see it from different perspectives. That's how you sort of start seeing the insights, by looking at the shape of the data and things like that. And when we had headsets, people did that, right? Like they got up and they walked around and they looked at it because like they were sort of hands-free and they were immersed in this headset. And when we would sort of do user testing with a tablet, it was a very different experience because people are used to using tablets, right? And used to using phones, and you kind of have this mental model of what you do when you without a phone. And so people would see like an object there, and rather than thinking, oh, how do I maybe I should just like go walk up to it and look at it, they're like, oh, how do I make it bigger? How do I bring it closer? They want to pinch and zoom and rotate, and it's like you're thinking, just walk up to it and look at it closer, right? Like it's right there. But they have this mental model of how it should work, right? And so then you have this challenge of like, do you meet them where they are in terms of what they want to be able to do, or do you then try to design interactions that encourage the sort of behavior that you want, which is for them to actually get up and walk around, right? So there's definitely a big challenge in terms of how people actually envision the experience when they're using these different devices.
How do you do prototyping? How do you design for both voice, audio type of inputs and?
So let's step back a little bit. So when you are designing for mobile or for web, there are many tools you can go online to use. You can use, there are, 25 wireframing apps, there are UI SDKs, there are patterns that you can use. So in many ways, the design of a mobile app today, non-AR, is very focused on the functional, because the interaction part of it has already been figured out, and there are 10 years at least or more of experience and mature frameworks that you can use to do this, right? When you move into AR, there is none of that, right? So we are trying to reuse some of the same tools that we have used for mobile. So you mentioned you do wireframing. It's like, but where does the frame end in AR? Where does it start with? That's the end. And so there is an entire new generation of design tools that does not exist yet, that has to be created. And that that means that in a way the most reliable way of designing something today is to actually build it. You have to build, iterate very quickly. So what we do is that once we have decided what we want to prototype, we actually do very quick and dirty Unity prototypes of what this thing is going to be like. And those are becoming, the first thing that always happens is that your prototyping tools become better, faster. So, and that's happening when you look at the later versions of AR Core and AR Kit from Apple. When you see what the guys at Unity and Unreal are doing, they are simplifying everything from how you set up your 3D environment to how do you write your shaders. There is this beautiful thing you can do in Unity now, where you can like draw your shader and then it outputs a material, and it's really nice. But it's still not a very design-friendly practice, right? You still need to have some level of technical programming understanding of what you want to do. So that's what we do today. Honestly, we do that. We do, especially my team. That's what my team does. Like we do prototyping. So we take the ideas. We have a bucket list of things we want to test. We engage with user research. We have this idea. We are thinking of doing X. Let's go talk to users about how do they really understand this. And that's very important because, like a lot of the people that are very technical, they have a bias of what they believe the future should be. But our users are way back into what they think the problem is and how to solve it. So we try to find a middle ground where we design something cool, but that's not like the coolest thing, but that it's still easier to understand. And then we prototype these, we make it very ugly, but very quickly, and we try to put it in front of people very quickly. That's a good thing about working at Google is that there are thousands of people there, so we can very quickly put it to test. And we just iterate on that. But at the same time, one of the things that we're trying to push in our team is to be very conscious that it is by our design process that we can influence the new generation of tools that need to come. So as an example, one of the things that, very basic things that we are trying to define is how do you specify units of size for AR content. And I don't remember the details right now, but we are working on that. So that it is able to go from a design that generally happens in 2D to an object that lives in 3D.
Okay. I think going back to what we discussed before about the. Okay, I'll go to another question. Let's talk about your team, or how the team is built and what it consists of. A designer, a researcher. How does it look like?
Yeah, I mean, we actually have like a really small but scrappy team, and we kind of just sort of do a bit of everything ourselves. So we don't necessarily have a dedicated researcher. We'll just do the research, whether it's generative or user testing. We'll do that ourselves. We'll do the UX, visual design, the prototyping, and we have like one sort of dedicated developer that does like, all of the hardcore sort of programming, but a lot of the designers will actually be doing a lot of the prototyping as well in Unity. And then, we're also a part of the emerging tech group, so we have sort of, broader support from, other designers and developers and as well within the organization that are able to kind of help as needed. But yeah, it really is just like this kind of small, scrappy team. So yeah, that's what I was saying about the challenge of, getting that sort of innovation prioritized versus, all of the other needs that the company has to meet as well. So yeah.
Well, the team I'm part of is not my team. I wish it was my team. No, it's about, I think you asked me the same question earlier today. I think the ballpark is around 45 people. Of those, it's about 10 people in user experience. About 10 people kind of like in different management positions, from product management to making sure that we behave. And then about 25 developers between Android and iOS, more or less. Like it's funny, like there are always more iOS developers than Android developers. I don't know why, but like, yeah, everything needs more iOS developers. Yeah.
And okay, POC to deployment. POC, proof of concept, to deployment. Where do you see the challenges moving from proof of concepts, working with different companies, to actually deploying and using and getting there?
Yeah, I mean, I think the challenge is, like I said, the technology keeps changing so much, and you're kind of constantly having to reshuffle your priorities to figure out, what you're going to support and, what people are going to be willing to use and to adopt. So there's always that challenge. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I guess, are you thinking more the challenge like sort of externally or like within an organization of sort of building something out and deploying it?
I think, first of all, I see a lot, like, I'm in the enterprise world, and I see a lot of different companies, trying out augmented reality headsets, trying out different applications. But there is always a challenge between, trying out and, trying this cool technology, than to actually moving to deployments where companies actually use the device and the technology on a daily basis, and wear these headsets for a couple of hours, day in, day out. How do you think that we can, or maybe you already passed that barrier, from proof of concepts to actual deployments?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the other challenges is, like, if you deploy something and customers start using it, then you have to support it, right? And like, whatever issues they have, like, you have to help fix it. You'll get feature requests coming in, you'll get that long list of complaints coming in, and so you kind of have to think carefully as well about, like, are you ready to deploy it at the place that it's in right now? And because a lot of times you get it to this place where it will be good enough, but then that there's always these technical things that aren't quite right because maybe the technology just hasn't kind of gotten there. And do you then sort of deploy it and then have to deal with what is going to come in versus waiting a little bit longer? And so that becomes challenging because, like, you're often, like, scaling back the vision. Like, often you have these grand visions and you kind of have to scale it back a little bit. And, like, one was talking about the little, arrows versus the big arrows, and just, I think that's, like, definitely a bit of a challenge. I don't know if that quite answers your question.
Do you have some thoughts?
Yes, I think augmented reality is going through what I recently heard on a podcast called the pilot hell. And pilot hell is, there are a lot of companies that are very interested in doing this AR thing, and then they hire the Microsofts or the Lenovo's or the IBMs of the world, and they create a pilot program, and they run the pilot program, but it never goes past that. But this is not unique to AR. By the way, this has been going on for at least 7 years. If you talk to people that's been in other companies, I guess you were in Meta before, and you had a lot of that. And the people that were at ODG, another headset manufacturer, they lived probably like 10 years out of running pilot programs. But this is not unique to AR. So if you look at artificial intelligence 15 years ago, they were exactly in the same position. A lot of pilots, a lot of things. I think the key is when people that both are running the pilots, but also the people that are creating the devices, they really start to narrow down in a few use cases that really make a lot of sense and add a lot of value. And I think we are arriving to that point right now. And I hope that, just like Microsoft, this really large sale of headsets for the US Army, to very narrow use cases, we are starting to identify, or industry is starting to identify what are those use cases that really make sense, and hopefully this year that momentum continues and we start seeing more and more adoption.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the biggest challenges for adoption. Where do you see the barriers? We talked a little bit about, like, the price of the headsets and like the input methods, but what other issues do you think keep people away from really being able to use this in a meaningful way? I'm talking about, like, headsets, not necessarily AR, mobile AR.
I mean, I guess for AR in general, I think there's often a lot of interest where people think it looks really cool and it's exciting, but I wonder if there's maybe a little bit of fear as well of, like, is this just a gimmick, or is it like, you know, is it going to be like a flash in the pan like 3D televisions were, right? You know, and so I think there's maybe some skepticism, not necessarily always bad, but there's some skepticism about like the longevity of it potentially. So, you know, if you're going to make a huge investment, you want to know that it's worthwhile, and there's always competing, you know, priorities and interests. So that's probably a challenge. And I think, like I said, it just comes back to like adding value. You know, if you can find that compelling use case and create something that is going to motivate people to open up their wallets, then I think that's going to be the big thing, right?
Oh, there are many challenges for adoption. Like I have a long list of things. But number one is that mismatch between the expectation and what can really be built today. So a lot of companies that when they start exploring augmented reality, they want to build this, you know, what's the name of that movie that's always mentioned? No, well,
Minority
something like
Report?
Minority Report type of thing, and then they realize that the number one, it cannot really be built, and number two is really a crappy way of interacting with your computer. But then number two is, so that's number one. Number two is identifying these use cases where it really makes sense. And funny thing, that's not a technology question, right? Like if you think about it, it's more for the product managers or for the people that are in charge of using these devices within the organization. So a funny thing that happened is when I was still at Lenovo is that initially we were talking with the IT departments of the organizations and selling this as an IT product, and we realized that that was a mistake. That you actually need to talk to the people that run the operations of the organization, because those are the ones that are really willing, sort of capable of understanding where in the organization they can use these devices. So there is number two, that the number two factor is that we need to be better at conveying where or helping the user, the clients identify where are the real valuable opportunities, and not just say, oh, you can use this device to do everything. But also number three, and this was very important when I was in Lenovo, the companies, they do not have the programmers to do this. So at some point we were talking with a very large elevator manufacturer that I cannot say the name of, and they were very excited, right? Like, oh, we can do this for our maintenance and repair of the elevators, or for the installation, helping people install. And then, you know, who is going to implement your apps? And they had a team of, you know, like Windows developers or Android developers. And the development team was like really scared, like, what? Like, do what? Like, you need, what is that, right? Like, so that is a big obstacle, right? So there are two ways to go about that. Either you develop the apps for your clients, like IBM is doing, or